So in the last episode, we mentioned that people today are pretty skeptical about marriage because they think it's a 50% chance. What do you guys think about that?
No.
Yeah.
It is not 50%.
Mm-hmm.
It's more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm. I think that statistic kind of gets misconstrued and misunderstood. There's a lot more detail that goes into the divorce rate than what people might think.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of actually the right percentage is that only 40% of marriage actually get dissolved, and then 60% are second marriages and 73% are third marriages. So like you said, the stats when you say 50% chance is not statistical correct because they're not including third, fourth, fifth marriages. So it's not fair to say, well, you have a 50% chance, because if I was getting married and I would hear that, I would be very, very discouraged. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's either I'm gonna make it or this marriage is gonna fail. So it's important, like you said, to get the right statistical, I guess.
So
number.
does that 40, you said 41%?
Yeah.
Does that include the second marriages? Like, is that all marriages, or is that's just first marriages?
Yeah, just the first, and then of course, with the second marriage you go up with the 60%.
There's a higher likelihood that you would get a divorce.
And then with the third one, 73%. That's like pretty high.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I think the more times that you try and the more times you've dissolved a marriage, the more okay you are with doing that.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll just try again. I'll just try again. That's why you've got people who are like, oh yeah, it's his fifth wedding, and everyone's like, oh, okay. Usually there's some problems with that.
Yeah.
Usually the common denominator going on. But
Well, this is Erica.
I'm Kallie.
I'm Savannah.
And this is the Head Over Feels podcast. And today we're going to be talking about marriage. And I want to start with some statistics about divorce. I was just reading a couple of days ago while I was preparing for this episode, and I think it was interesting that I found that just 40% of couples divorce after 10 years of marriage. So again, we're talking about first marriage. It says that only 4% of couples get divorced after 10 years. And I think, again, this is pretty personal. We can say, all couples, I don't know, like 96% of couples get divorced after 10 years. This is not what I'm saying. But it was interesting to understand the reasons why people are getting divorced nowadays. What do you guys think? What do you guys think people get divorced nowadays? What are some of the reasons?
I think there's plenty of reasons, but well, obviously there's like the big things like infidelity or big huge issues like that. But I think there's also like I guess I could say like littler reasons for divorce. Reasons that if couples were to really try to focus and work on those issues, the marriage could be saved or the relationship could be saved. Whereas in other cases with the big issues like infidelity, that can be a little more difficult to overcome for some couples. But
Yeah, I like that.
A lot of cop-outs.
Yeah.
Kind of like, oh, well, we're just too different now. We've grown apart. We're incompatible.
We don't have the same goals anymore.
Yeah, which, people do change over time. So it's important to be, I think, meeting up with your spouse continually and consistently throughout your marriage, making sure that you do have the same goals. But a lot of the time, I think people just drift apart. They stop working on their marriage. I know another one for divorce is financial problems.
Yeah.
That's a huge one. And I wonder how much of that is to do with the lack of prep before getting married. Like they don't talk about it, because financial stuff, just kind of like the topic of sex, they're both very taboo. You don't really talk about them quite as openly as you might think.
Before marriage or even during? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe even both. Yeah, I mean, like, really, you think of, your parents are a great example of money, right? They may not handle it well, but you can see your parents, okay, they're doing savings, or this is how they're making a budget. But the chances of them actually talking to you about that, pretty low. And so I think we do the same thing in our marriages, where we don't talk about the kind of uncomfortable details like putting together a budget. Are you a saver? Are you a spender? I think a lot of divorce comes from not wanting to talk about the hard issues. Things like financials, infidelity is a huge one for sure. That's gonna change a relationship forever. But
Yeah, I like what you guys shared, because you actually shared both hard reasons and soft reasons. So, hard reasons are pretty much the three A's: abuse, addictions, and affairs. Those are problems that undermine your trust in the relationship. And those, like you said, this is going to be hard to overcome in a relationship. But then, like you said, sometimes, you lack communication or you lack intimacy. And some people actually decide to end their marriage because of those reasons. And I'm not saying those are not valid, because if you don't talk with your husband anymore, you don't have a great communication, that could really affect your relationship. But I noticed while I was doing the research that people are too fast to give up on these problems, that I do think maybe even with therapy sometimes you need professional help. I do think you can overcome them. And it was interesting to read that people that were interviewed and asked, okay, what are the two main reasons why people are getting divorced? And I'm going to throw some numbers here. They said that the most frequently cited was, like you, Kallie, said, the way that the spouse was handling money. 49% actually reported that was one of the reasons why they were getting divorced. Infidelity, like Savannah said, 37%. Not getting enough attention, 40%. I think it was very interesting to read all these different numbers, and it made me think about the book. You probably guys are familiar with this book. It's called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, from John Gottman. And in this book, it was really interesting how he approached this, because he observed for 16, I think, if I'm not wrong, 16 years, this couple, he created this love lab where he would invite the couples, and then he would, this is kind of creepy, but it's not creepy, he would like observe is a better word, the couples interacting. And it was very interesting for me to read that he was able to predict divorce with a 98% accuracy. And he noticed that people who tend to be a risk for their divorce were engaging in the fourth horseman. So, Kallie, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. So I think most people are familiar with like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, like that phrase. And so essentially what he's saying by these four horsemen is their behaviors that will lead to divorce. So if they're done over time, usually.
And repeatedly.
Yes. Criticism is the first one. It's where it's different than complaining. Complaining, how Gottman describes it, is you're using always or never. You're always late. You never think about me. Stuff like that. Criticism is more about like attacking your spouse as a person,
like their character.
Yes, something. Yeah, exactly. A step further than that is contempt. That's the second horseman. It's attack on the character, but even more so. Like you want it to hurt. It's kind of that. Like you don't show respect for them. You're wanting to seem better, superior. And then usually a response to those two is defensiveness. That's the third one.
Yeah.
That one is where you're justifying all your actions. You're not really wanting to take the blame, so you just don't. You say, well, you did this. And you kind of, you're not able to see how you're responsible because you're so attacked all the time. And so
Yeah,
you're just defending yourself.
And your actions are justifiable because you're being attacked.
Yeah,
then.
exactly. Well, I'm always the victim, so
Yeah.
yeah.
You're always doing this to me, and so I should be able to do this, you know.
Yes. And then the fourth one is stonewalling, where you shut down. So Gottman talks about emotional flooding, where someone is just there's feelings heaped on them like repeatedly, and they just can't respond anymore, and so they're flooded, is what he'll say. And so to stonewall is where you just don't make any eye contact, you don't talk, you shut down.
It's the silent treatment.
Yes. And usually I'm pretty sure they all have their own, like gender differences, but stonewalling is usually done by men and not women. So that's why you've got kind of that, it's stereotypical, but the nagging wife and then the guy who just says nothing. Like, it's true. Like that's kind of how we tend to deal with things as men and women.
So I have a follow-up question for you, because I remember when I was reading and learning about the stonewalling, I thought, at least in my experience, it's positive for me. Like sometimes I shut down and sometimes I need, because I think in my marriage I'm definitely the spouse that does more often. I think I need time to, I need to take 5 minutes and then I'll come back to the conversation. So do you guys think that stonewalling could be like a positive response sometimes?
I think what you're describing is different than stonewalling, because you're probably describing like, hey, I think I'm not being productive. I'm not helping in this conversation, so I need to take a break. That's communicating with your spouse. Whereas stonewalling to me is just, I'm not communicating with you at all. I'm not telling you that I need to take a second to figure things out in my brain before I can talk to you about it. You're not going anywhere like that. I think what you're describing is different. And I think that is positive. Sometimes just rehashing a conversation over and over again without having time to be able to take a moment and think things through by yourselves can be harmful.
Yeah.
But to me that's different than stonewalling.
No, I like that.
I agree. It's I think of it similar to the difference between a timeout and asking your kids if they want a break. It's different to say, I just don't want to emotionally connect with you right now, versus, you know what? We're getting tense right now. Emotions are super hot. Let's just simmer down.
Yeah, I need a
rather
break.
than I don't want you here. So yeah, I think there's the stonewalling, the shutdown, and then there's the emotional break. Like, I don't want to say something that I'll regret. I'm going to stop now. I'm noticing that I'm not in control of my emotions. Maybe the other person isn't either. I think that's different. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
And it also it's interesting to me that men tend to stonewall more than women. And I wonder if that's kind of can relate to how we look at men in society, how they need to be stoic and they need to be strong and they shouldn't have emotions. And so when they do have emotions, when they do have feelings, they're not sure what to do with it. And so they'll shut down because they can't cry. They're not allowed, they're not quote unquote allowed to cry.
Yeah.
And so the only way to deal with things is to shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I really like Gottman's parenting side of his ideas, and in his emotional coaching steps, understanding your emotions and naming them, like name it to tame it kind of idea. There's all these steps where you're essentially trying to feel what your child is feeling and help them deal with it in a respectful way. And I wonder if men who had emotional training shut down less. I wonder if there's a way to prevent or at least minimize stonewalling. Because you're saying like, well, men aren't really allowed to show emotion. Is that why they're showing emotion the way that they do? It's kind of dysfunctional. I'm wondering if maybe we could start giving men some tools to help them, because it doesn't seem fair for men to always be unable to process what's going on. I mean, marriages are always going to have a lot of emotions attached. Like that's just part of it, especially if you're married to a woman. We got a lot going on. Like we feel very, very strongly.
And this isn't a dig at men.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a societal like expectation or a norm that we've come to accept that I don't think is good or appropriate.
Yeah.
But it's just something that our society has come to view as important for men to live with or to live by, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If you don't do this, you're not a man. If
Yeah.
you're not stoic, you're not a man.
Yeah.
I think because we have this expectation of, oh, men need to be strong. They need to be strong. So if they cry, we like the society thinks, oh, if they cry, they're not strong, so they can't protect us. And I've noticed, like you were mentioning, when you're trying to teach this to a kid. sometimes when you see boys cry, you always say, oh, boys don't cry.
Yeah, like, what are you doing? Like, what happened to you?
And, if you keep saying that to a boy, I think he would not believing
it
that.
sends a message.
Yeah, it sends a message. Yeah.
And I think as far as gender differences go in emotion, I think it's okay if people naturally, cry less, or if men want to be strong, if they want to provide for people. I think that's great. I think that's a beautiful instinct. But that should not lead to the downfall of that man. Being the protector, the provider, whatever you want to call it, that should not essentially sabotage everything else that man has to offer. I think you can protect in a healthy way. You can provide in a healthy way. I don't think it needs to be a sacrifice. But sometimes people go too far the other way, where they give into everything they want, and so they don't sacrifice enough. And I think we've been talking about, society pushes men to show their emotions in another way, and then sometimes society shows us we need to value all of our emotions, and we're never wrong, and everything we're feeling is valid. And I think we're sort of seeing the harms of that right now. There needs to be a balance for sure.
And I think that goes back to our first episode when we talked about individualism and how it is important to be able to take care of ourselves and to like stand up for ourselves in times where that's appropriate. But I already said this in the first episode, but I worry that individuals are too focused on themselves and they're not focused enough on the relationships around them, which is why we're doing this podcast in the first place. But it kind of goes back to this idea from the book Take Back Your Marriage by Dr. Bill Doherty, and where he talks about the consumer marriage, which is basically, I am so focused on myself and my personal wants and maybe some needs as well, that I don't recognize what my wants or needs or whatever are doing to my relationship and doing to my spouse. And so I had a quote here from Doherty's book, the Take Back Your Marriage book, that I really loved. So I just want to read that to you really quick. So he says, consumer marriage enters the picture when I focus mainly on what I'm not getting in the marriage and on how my mate is not meeting my needs. I'm in consumer mode when I fail to look at my own limitations, when I continually compare my spouse or my marriage to my fantasies of other relationships, when I confuse my desires with my needs, when I lose the distinction between behavior that is completely unacceptable, such as physical abuse, infidelity, alcoholism, emotional cruelty, and chronic lying, things like that, and behavior that bothers or saddens me, such as a spouse not giving me enough affection or emotional support, working excessive hours, showing lack of sexual interest, or having certain unlikable personality characteristics. The consumer attitude turns marital disappointments into marital tragedies and constructive efforts for improvement into entitled demands for change. And so that's basically my point, is that we can get too focused on, he said it right here, our desires, where we confuse our desires with our needs. And so marriages suffer because we're too involved with ourselves and not enough in the marriage itself.
Yeah, there's this cost benefit approach to marriage, saying, okay, I'm, marrying this man or this woman only if I get something back.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to your point in the first episode of the individualistic approach. If you're getting something out of the relationship, then you go for it. But then if it requires maybe too much sacrifice or too work, too effort, then you might say, oh, I don't want that because I'm not going to gain anything out of this relationship.
Yeah, that's exchange theory, what you were describing. I was thinking of another principle, comparison level for alternatives, that's in exchange theory. That's this idea that if we do not believe that what we're currently getting is as good as it should be, we look for alternatives. And I remember my parents, actually, they're so cute. They were going to this marriage class. They're like, Kallie, it's really great. Like, we're learning stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like, this is my major. You're like, I know this stuff. And they were talking about, my dad said, oh man, social exchange theory it was scary. Like, it was cold. And I was like, it's great for dating, not marriage. That it's not at all a bad thing to be saying, okay, I'm dating this person, I'm in this relationship, should I be getting more out of it? Is this what I really want? Because you can leave that. You know, it's not permanent. Nothing is, set with the government. You don't have papers, you just break up and you're done. Not that you should treat relationships so flippantly, but a marriage is where you've made your choice.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that choice, you should have dated better, really. I mean, unless they do a complete 180, and you couldn't foresee that. But
yeah.
But
which does happen.
It does happen. It does. There's always the extenuating circumstances to consider, but most people are in the ordinary circumstances. And so I like that idea, going back to, are your desires actually worth messing up the marriage for? Do they come before the marriage? And a lot of the times they don't. If you're looking for alternatives, you've already given up on the marriage. You need to be seeing the good that's in your spouse. Because I can tell you for sure, there's other men I could have married. We all have other people we could have married. Like, it's not like there's this one person and it's only going to be them. And if you didn't meet them, you would have been doomed for it. No, it's not like that. Everyone has multiple people.
But you're choosing, both of you are married. I'm not married. But like you and your spouses are choosing each other every day.
Every day.
You're working on that relationship every single day. Maybe not totally consciously, but that relationship is not forgotten.
Yeah.
It's not put by the wayside for your own personal desires.
Yeah. I've put my eggs in this basket. I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah.
There's other things I could have done. I'm going to stick with this opportunity. I've got something good here. I'm going to make it even better. I'm not looking elsewhere. I don't need to.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we all have needs and we all have wants. And it's important to be able to like decipher which is which. And I think that's something that you're going to have to do constantly in a relationship.
Yeah.
And again, maybe not consciously, but all the time. But it takes a lot of reflection and a lot of practice to be able to decide, okay, am I advocating for a want or a personal actual need? And so at the end of the day, it's important to recognize, to figure that out. And there's nothing wrong with advocating for your needs, but it's important to also remember that marriage is about the union of the couple, and it's not always about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If you wanted to choose the easiest thing for yourself, don't get in a relationship.
Well, yeah.
They take work.
Yeah.
And I feel like an overarching theme here today was choice. Choosing to love your spouse, and how you communicate with them is a choice. How you respond to their needs can make or break your marriage.
Yeah.
And the tricky thing is that it's all up to you, and it's up to your spouse. It's a give and take. It's not all on you, but you have to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Anyways, next episode we'll be talking about the parent-child relationship, which I'm really excited about, because I think that's a topic that, or a relationship in life that a lot of people have struggles with.
Yeah.
Our parents do the best that they can, but there's always something that kids expect or don't expect or whatever our parents expect and don't expect, or you know what I mean. Anyways, maybe you didn't see your parents doing the things that we've talked about here about being intentional or about being careful with each other's needs and working on that relationship. And you might have thought that their relationship could have been more than what it was with each other, with as parents, as spouses, and with you as the child. So a lot of people doubt marriage and parenting because their parents, made mistakes, but and they don't have confidence in their own ability to be good parents.
Yeah.
But stay tuned for our episode next week, where we'll be talking about how to see our parents as people and how once we become parents in life, how to see our children as people, despite all of our shortcomings.
Wow.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Head Over Feels. If you want more resources or information, check out our Instagram and website. Both links in the description of this video. Thanks.